and a native, and has a varied background in the private sector where he held executive leadership and senior management positions before joining the free market public policy world. Mr. Pritchett was most recently Senior Vice President at the John Locke Foundation, North Carolina's oldest and largest public policy think tank. He speaks and writes on the intersection of free markets, business, sports, culture, and leadership. His work has been published in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, The Federalist, Washington Examiner, Carolina Journal, and Charlotte Observer, among others. He is happily married and has 4 children. He's also got a podcast regarding the gun debate. But anyway, I just wanted to introduce Mr. Pritchett with Mississippi Public Policy. Come on up and speak to us.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Hello. How's everybody?
Good.
I'm going to put this down here. I think you can hear me just fine.
We've got a few hearing impaired, so you may have to speak up.
Okay, let me know if you can't hear me. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you, and hopefully what I have to say will be something that you've heard lots and believe in, and I won't be necessarily convincing you to think otherwise, but maybe affirming some of the things that you've long held. What I want to do is share just a little bit about what a think tank does, what's the purpose of a think tank, and then talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at the Mississippi Center for Public Policy and the Mississippi Justice Institute, which are the organizations that I'm now responsible for as a CEO. And give you a little bit of a sense of what I think the problems are. My focus is really going to be on the problems that I see in Mississippi from an economic freedom perspective. I won't get into some of the other cultural or ethical or moral issues. I want to kind of focus this on economic freedom and what we need to try to get prosperity and growth. I'll share a little bit too with you about my views on what conservatism is. It's come from an article I wrote recently, in fact last week, that the Mississippi Press Association published, and I'm not sure exactly where it's ended up. I think I saw it was in the newspaper in Clinton last week. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about what we do at the think tank. One of the most important things is to try to use data and reason and rational thought and evidence to convince people of influence, particularly those of elected officials, but others as well, in media and business and academic, of the policies that we want to be put in place in Mississippi on behalf of taxpayers, on behalf of residents, what we think those policies should be to improve life here, and to be more consistent with things like Constitution and liberty. And in order to do that, as a public policy think tank, generally speaking, rather than using a political process, we try to use data and science and evidence and bring to bear the reasons why we advocate a particular policy. In many cases, we will look at what work has been done by organizations like the Cato Institute or AEI or Heritage or some other organization where PhDs have looked at an issue, for example, and looked at multiple states and seen what the results are of those policies being adopted, positively or negatively. And then our job is to share that with those people in influence and try to convince them to do the right thing, not to waste our money, to do things that will be smart investments on behalf of Mississippi. So it's within that vein that I'll share with you my thoughts here. As it relates to conservatism, it's a word I've heard a lot since moving here to Mississippi, and I think most everyone I've met considers themselves to be a conservative, which is one of the reasons we moved to Mississippi, like a lot of the things you folks stand for. And I should say now we stand for, since I'm now a resident. But I think it's lost a little bit of its meaning. It's become a bit interchangeable with things like I'm a member of the GOP, or what my particular viewpoint is on being pro-life or Second Amendment. And as important as those things are, those definitions are really not necessarily wholly accurate, nor are they enough to define conservatism. A conservative is really someone who will also stand up to the encroaching power of all forms of government, city government, county, state, federal, and will stand up to the growing corporatism that tries to govern us from the boardroom, and to the menace to our society that is a progressive culture. As I mentioned, I want to kind of focus this on the first thing here. To make Mississippi a leader in economic growth and entrepreneurship and job creation and prosperity, we have to make progress on the issues of a long-standing dependence on government. That's been my view in the last 90 days here, is that is a big problem that we have to tackle, and it won't be news to you. We've got to change our public policy in this regard. We've got to value work, we've got to remove barriers to risk-taking, we've got to free parents to choose the educational path that works best for their children. We've got to leverage the power of private enterprise and private institutions like churches and families and nonprofits and private organizations. These sort of faith-based and philanthropic organizations, the generosity of them has been amazing to me, and that's a story that goes beyond Mississippi. The kind of generosity and philanthropy that exists here is well known, and it's a credit to Mississippians. And there's a lot of good that can be done from that, but we have to prevent government from getting in the way of it and competing with that philanthropy as they are wont to do. Because we know the best solutions for civil society come from local, efficient, effective, temporary actions where there is a personal relationship that ensures mutual accountability. And when the government is involved, that is absent. There is no relationship between someone who receives money from government. It's how we used to solve all of our problems in civil society before there was a FDR or LBJ. Too many Mississippians, however, are seeking to petition government to do this work, and they're competing with the private sector. Worse, too many individuals, too many companies are looking to government for a contract or for a job or for a partner or for protection from competition. And when we allow government to become sort of the holy grail in this way, we thwart the opportunity for Mississippians to prosper. We weaken the free market. We create a disincentive to the formation and the deployment of capital. What's more, such reliance on government ensures that only those who are currently in power will have significant influence on Mississippi. They'll get to determine things like who represents us in the legislature and executive branches of government. So what makes a conservative, in my view, is not a party, it's not an allegiance to a particular leader or a political campaign, but really power of ideas. As conservative, our ideas are based on some bedrock values, some fundamental truths. Freedom is one of those policy initiatives that we know works. A limited and restrained government is the essence of working liberty. And the principle of ordered liberty holds all of that together. So our goal at the Mississippi Center for Public Policy is to play a leadership role in helping to build a Mississippi where individual liberty, individual opportunity, and individual responsibility reign because government is limited. We believe this is the only way that nations or states or cities have ever enjoyed durable prosperity. So, now if we do those things, if we remain committed to those ideas and we work hard to convince others of their value, which is one of the primary responsibilities that we have at the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, we can experience what I've heard some refer to as a Magnolia Renaissance. And we can say that conservatism made that possible. Real conservatism, the kind of which Bill Buckley and Ronald Reagan and Milton Friedman spoke, the kind where we're free to pursue our own individual version of liberty and speak our own minds, the kind where we encourage people to take action and take risks in pursuit of their own definition of happiness, the kind where we take personal responsibility for our futures and stop looking for government to solve our problems. There is an important role for government, we all know, but it must be limited. We all know government functions best when it's closest to the people, when it's open, when it's transparent. And although our national government continues to grow in this sort of unwieldy bureaucratic swamp, our country still remains federalist, and hopefully after 9 p.m. tonight, even more so. We're a collection of semi-sovereign states. Federalism is really a conservative idea. As you remember, Reagan stated in his first inaugural address, the federal government did not create the states created the federal government. Thanks to our founding fathers, the real political and the real policy power rests with the states. It belongs with the states. It's one of the reasons I'm excited about being here at the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, because there are innovative things that we can do in a state that needs to have economic liberty, needs to experience prosperity and wealth generation and creation. And we can be a model in those policy initiatives that can be applied to other states. And I talked to the people at Heritage and AEI and Cato and other organizations who work on policy, and they all understand this, that the real work happens at the state level. Things get done at the state level. It is very hard to get something done at the federal level. And so I'm excited for us to be able to bring some of those folks to bear and their ideas and their intellect and their experiences, so we can help influence those who have influence over us to make some good decisions with our money and with our policy. So I've been in Mississippi only for a few months now. I've learned a few things. One of the things I know, y'all are not very fond of people telling you what to do, which is especially not people in Washington. I admire that and I appreciate it. I think that's a conservative thing too. That sort of independence goes to the heart of the conservative movement. It was what gave us Bill Buckley, who started National Review. It's what gave us Ronald Reagan, and also it's what gave us Donald Trump. And if we harness that, conservatism can lead the way to a prosperous Mississippi. A Mississippi where individual liberty, individual opportunity, individual responsibility can reign because government is limited. So I've been doing some talking, going around seeing some folks, meeting with donors, trying to meet folks who are important for me to know here in Mississippi. And I've been getting some of the same questions that you might be thinking yourself. I'll just share some of those with you. A lot of times the question is, what are your top priorities from a policy standpoint for Mississippi for the next legislative session? What are the big issues you're working on at the Mississippi Institute for Justice? What problems do you see holding us back from being a more prosperous state? All good questions, and I'll try to answer a couple of those here. I typically come at these sort of questions the same way, because I believe our current challenges are sort of born from the same mother. And these solutions that I will lay out here, and these beliefs are not really magical or complex. In fact, they're pretty simple. And the evidence is very strong that when states adopt these ideas, the people thrive. So all of our efforts, whether they be legislative, whether they be legal, whether they be our events or our thought leadership or our communications or outreach, they're all going to be marshaled in the same direction, towards a very few, very powerful, very simple ideas. So I'll give you 4 of these kind of concepts, if you will, that I think are true and that will help you understand the things that we're focusing on. I'll share with you some fundamental beliefs, and then share with you some of the things that we're working on from a legislative policy standpoint in the course of the next year. First, I'll say it again if I didn't make it clear in the beginning, we have an overdependence on government in Mississippi. Whether it's for sustenance, employment, contracts, or subsidies, too much of our economy is driven by the public sector. 2, the only durable solutions to public problems, the only proven way to create a sustainable long-term economic growth is through embracing the private sector. 3, for all Mississippians to enjoy the benefits of a growing and prosperous Mississippi, we've got to secure and defend the natural rights of the individual. All liberty is individual. There is no collective liberty. The system that allows for individuals to pursue their own interests, regardless of their income or their age or their race or their gender or their social connections, is the free market. And that system, which is ruled by consumer choice and competition and the profit and loss motive, is the greatest power man has ever discovered for creating wealth. We've got to learn to trust that in Mississippi. We've got to let the private sector fully explore ideas and let the profit and loss system determine the allocation of resources in Mississippi, not the political process. We can't create a bigger pie in Mississippi any other way, in my view. 4, looking at the evidence from national sources, and there are many, and I'll give you some examples of that. Mississippi has been a laggard on business climate rankings. The data is basically telling us that Mississippi has not been relying on free markets, or on consumer choice, or on competition. In short, we're not embracing capitalism. we've been embracing public sector activities like political favor seeking.
Amen.
We've got to resist the tendency of government to see the private sector as something it can regulate or organize or predict or manage. It simply cannot. The evidence is very clear in this regard. The role government should play is really to make sure our natural rights, our life, our liberty, our property, are protected, while the free market is supported. And it's a very simple way for government to do this. Supported by a sound regulatory system, a sound legal system, and a simple tax structure. A tax structure that does not take away from those who produce. It does not create a disincentive to hard work and to savings and to capital being risked. What are the fundamental issues or the beliefs of Mississippi Center for Public Policy and the Mississippi Justice Institute? They're very simple. I'll give you 5. And these 5 are really the beliefs that govern whether or not we get involved in a policy as we evaluate whether it makes sense. And they are: limited government. The Constitution is our guide in this regard. 2, free markets. Competition and consumer choice produce the best outcomes. 3, strong families. It's the wellspring of civil society. 4, individual liberty. And when I say individual liberty, that means personal liberty, economic liberty, and religious liberty. And 5, personal responsibility, which is a requirement of individual liberty. So again, limited government, free markets, strong families, individual liberty, personal responsibility. That's what we care about. Those are the belief systems we have. And everything else flows from there. So in terms of what the legislative outreach policy issues are for this year, I'll just share a couple of them with you. Things happen, and while these are things we're working on today, that may change. As of last Thursday, we had a director of the Mississippi Justice Institute, and on Friday the governor named him the state auditor, so things happen. You have to be willing to react. But the things we're going to be working on: 1, defending free speech rights on college campuses. We want to educate your children and grandchildren, and we don't care how uncomfortable that makes our progressive friends on the left, whether they're professors or administrators. And believe it or not, that's an issue even in a conservative place like Mississippi. 2, we want to continue one of the areas on strengthening families, and that is in working on innovative solutions for the state's foster care crisis. 3, and this is a big one, is eliminating red tape. The kind that thwarts business, that prevents business and job creation. So we're going to work on reforming occupational licensing and other regulatory throttles of the free market. 4th, we're working on, again, sort of innovative reforms, encouraging reforms to the healthcare system, which is a real challenge for sure. Ways that we can lower costs and increase healthcare access. And then 5, we'll continue to work on expanding school choice. Trying to put parents in charge of choosing the learning environment that best meets the needs of their children. As you all know, the best results come from competition. When there's competition, the results are much better, and this is true of the education system as well. The Justice Center, the Mississippi Justice Institute, and I don't know how many of you are aware of it, it's been around for about 2 years. It's a great place if you're looking to land a job working for the governor or working for the president. The last 2 have. So we're looking for a constitutional conservative litigator. If you know somebody in Mississippi, the job will be open as of this Friday when Shadrack White.
Jim Kelly.
All right, give me the info. What we do is we basically represent Mississippians who've had their constitutional rights infringed in some way, usually by the government, and those who cannot afford to represent themselves. We work on government transparency, taxpayer accountability, freedom of speech, particularly in the area of freedom of religious conscience. We work on regulatory reforms, things like certificate of need and other licensing schemes that again, thwart the free market. And continuing the message, if you haven't heard it already, we're going to work on defeating monopolies and other corporate favoritism in Mississippi. And again, the expansion of rights of parents to choose education. We're working on charter school cases now, and there are other things that we're doing within the Justice Institute, because sometimes when we get a legislative policy victory that gets challenged by people like the Southern Poverty Law Center and others, we end up in court. So we have to be able to have a two-pronged approach. There's the legislative policy and there's protecting it with the Justice Institute. Last thing, I want to just leave you with a couple of stats to bring home my point about what we need to do about prosperity and also want to invite you to an event. But first let me tell you this area of public sector involvement and how much we are dependent on the public sector and on government. I looked at some data recently. Government spending as a share of the state economy in Mississippi, it's 55%, which means there are only 4 states in the United States that have a larger amount of their state economy controlled by government. To our business climate rankings in Mississippi are not good. And I've looked, there's about 15 of these kinds of stats I looked at. I'm just going to share 4 of them with you. In the area of information technology and innovation, according to the New Economy Index, we're 50th. According to Beacon Hill Institute, in the area of state competitiveness on business climate rankings, we're 50th. According to Forbes, at Best States for Business, we're 48th. And according to CNBC, for Top States for Business, we're 47th. And there are lots of others. And I think the highest ranking out of the 15 I looked at maybe had us 38th. Most of them were somewhere between 40 and 50. I think what all that tells us is not that there's anything wrong with Mississippi. There's nothing wrong with the people of Mississippi. There's nothing that makes our climate and not hospitable to a free market. What it tells us is that we're not relying on capitalism, we're relying on government. So, and what's wrong with that is that it takes the allocation of resources, which is best done by the free market, and it gives it over to the political class to allocate this resource. And I don't know about you, but I don't want the political class investing my money, deciding what they think is going to be the best result, where they can spend their money. I want somebody who has a profit and loss incentive, and as we know, government has none. Worse than that, it encourages people and companies, rather than to work on free market solutions and competitive issues and trying to serve customers and figure out how to win market share. Instead, it encourages us to invest in political campaigns and political action committees and lobbying and favor seeking. And so we end up with too many lawyers, too many lobbyists, not enough engineers, not enough architects, not enough developers, entrepreneurs, and not enough small and mid-sized businesses. So the evidence is really clear in this regard, and this is the most important message I want to deliver to you and that I plan on delivering over the course of the next year or however long people will allow me to continue to lead this organization. And that is that capitalism produces prosperity. Frederick Hayek and Milton Friedman won Nobel Prizes studying the relationship here, the economic relationship between capitalism and prosperity. And essential to that is economic liberty and economic freedom. And we're about 48th on the aggregate in that category. And if we want economic growth and we want prosperity, then we have got to increase the share of our economy that's controlled by the private sector. We have to break free of the dependence that we have on government. That's the only way. There is no other way. Well, that's the message I leave you with. I appreciate your time and look forward to taking any questions or hearing any comments or snide remarks. Yes, Don?
We had a brief discussion. Of course, you know, this state is run heavily by lobbyists, and one in particular in D.C. that used to be the governor of the state. We all know this.
I've heard the thing.
We all know this is true. Everything starts with education. I heard some NYU students today already complain about the Supreme Court picking that hadn't even been picked yet. $50,000 a year they pay in tuition at NYU, and they have them on the street thinking he'd already picked, and they're already describing this person as a man and wearing a white sheet and the whole bit. I agree with school choice. This is where we differ with our friends over with Russ Latino, is that the curriculum is in control of the federal government. I've been to talk to the Rankin County superintendents myself, throw their hands up in the air and say, well, we're mandated to do certain things. Well, then I don't need you as a $100,000 employee for Rankin County. If that's the case, the federal government's running our schools. The problem is the curriculum. It's not the teachers, it's not the superintendents, it's the curriculum. It's plain and simple. These kids that are graduating now couldn't even balance a checkbook. So we want to go from 50 to 25. We're not going to do it on the education system we're on now. As long as the books have Common Core in it, as long as the Christian schools are teaching Common Core. I took my son out 3 years ago with Freedom Project Academy up in with out of Wisconsin, and it's all done by computer. And you could do that computer in a church and have kids on a non-common core curriculum. That's been our big push in years past, is we've gone up there and talked to them, and they think we're wearing tinfoil. But I've seen the books. We actually had 3 superintendents sit here that were running for office. I had a book in front of them, 10 pages of Islam indoctrination in a history book. You can't find Christianity there, but their thing is, Don, we have to teach something about Islam in our schools. I said, they're bringing our boys back in body bags for their beliefs. You think that's something they really need to teach in our schools? Christianity ought to be number 1. But we've had this fight with math, with algebra. I've had algebra come to my house in the 7th grade, and I couldn't do it. Go to the principal and superintendent, show them the same problem, they can't do it. So we got people running our schools that can't even do the curriculum that they're teaching.
Well, I'm a big fan of all the work of Bill Bennett during the Reagan administration when he was head of Education Department, and everything I've read from him formed my opinion, frankly. And that is that I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think there are lots of reasons for the fact that education is failing. I think certainly a very bad idea is Common Core, giving the federal government the ability to determine what the curriculum is for local schools is a bad idea. It's bad policy. It's ineffective, I agree. I think the other thing that I learned from Bill Bennett is that the problem really is that, like everything else, the bigger and bigger it gets, the further away from its constituent, people it's serving, parents, communities, neighborhood. And everything that we've done is to try to make it sound better and look better, whether that's to make it more inclusive, or whether that's to try to get results that look like diversity, or to try to find a national answer because those people think that they are more qualified than the local people for curriculum. All that gets us further and further away, just like government always does, and we create this massive bureaucracy. And we spend money, but the more money we spend, the more we feed that bureaucracy. It's just like the federal government, just like any form of government, really. So I don't disagree with you. I think there's just massive problems with it that have to do with the fact that public education in too many places doesn't have any competition. Now, I come from North Carolina, where recently, and it took a while, it took a lot of public policy work, but recently there's been a lot of movement towards choice and towards charter schools. They've expanded the number of charter schools. There are actually for-profit schools, there are public schools, and then of course there are private schools like there are here. And you know, what the evidence shows is that the more you have competition, the more you increase the value to the students and the parents, the better the teachers are that you get. So I think, you know, if we can't have competition, we're never going to improve the schools. I think we can improve it by changing that policy. I would agree with you, Don. I think one of the reasons that our kids went to private school is curriculum. And every time you look, I'll give you a great example. My daughter Claire was doing a 4th grade project on the New Deal. And so she wrote a little summary report. She gave it to us to read, and we read it. And I was amazed because she was saying things like, you know, really the New Deal violated the Constitution, and it really didn't solve anything, and it made the economy worse for at least a decade. And I thought, where did she get this? Where's your resource material? Where did you find this? And she said, oh, I got it out of the book from school. And I said, let me see that. So I opened it up, and of course it wasn't a public school book, it was a private school textbook, and inside of it you had the real truth about what happened in the New Deal. And then I closed the book and I said, Joan, my wife, this is why we send our kid to private school. So you're right. You wouldn't have read that in a public school textbook anywhere. Mississippi or North Carolina or New York.
To your point about over-dependence on government, I think part of that problem is the fact that we've relinquished the responsibility of educating our children to the government rather than keeping it local. I think parents do not understand that they should be participating in school boards. And if you send your children to private school, then you have to be in the private school watching what they teach your children. And I applaud that school that your daughter went to for that reason. But I think if we do not do the service to the children by demanding that personal responsibility of the parent to be sure that the child's education is appropriate,
Right.
we lose a whole generation of adults. But then we lose how many more generations of children under that?
No, you're exactly right. I'll give you another good example of that. Parents have advocated that responsibility to come alongside the educational process and to be involved in it and to help with it, and to sometimes stand up to it. And we have, and I don't know what generation first started it, but obviously they're in a period now where their parents are totally uninvolved with education of their children. They expect the state to do it. And so a friend of mine, someone who was a supporter of the John Locke Foundation because he lives in North Carolina, is a gentleman named John Allison. John was the CEO of BB&T Bank, which is the 7th largest bank in the nation. Also was the CEO and chairman of Cato Institute. John's now a professor at Wake Forest University, and so I had the opportunity to ask him last year at lunch about what it's like to teach students now who come to a good school, Wake Forest University, and what is his viewpoint on, we've all heard the statistic, it's somewhere between 94 and 96% of all of those tenured professors on college campuses are left of center. And he said, well, first of all, that's understated. It's probably greater than that. But what I've determined now that he's been teaching for a few years, he said that if a student comes from high school and he has not been given a set of principles, taught a set of principles by his parents, if he comes to college, he or she comes to college with a completely open mind, without anything that gives them a bedrock foundation to believe in, any ideology, a conservative ideology, that there's about a 99% chance he's going to leave in 4 years being a liberal. That if, however, he or she comes with a set of ideas that they believe in, they will question those ideas, they will challenge those ideas, they will be challenged by them, but generally speaking, they will end up remaining conservatives, in many cases more conservative than they were when they entered. But the scary thing about that is if a parent doesn't, what we're producing now is why we care about this free speech issue on college campuses, is the result is there will be fewer and fewer of us and more of those other people on the left of center who come out of these colleges, and they're going to be involved in voting, and they're going to be involved in public policy, and they're going to do things like, one of the reasons I'm here in Mississippi, I'll tell you, is I grew up in North Carolina, and North Carolina was a red state, in many ways very similar to Mississippi. Strong agrarian background, relatively poor, small, didn't do very well in any of the rankings. In fact, if I go far enough back, probably when I was a child, North Carolina was probably behind Mississippi in a lot of these categories. What's happened is, because of, one, back to policies, because North Carolina had to embrace the free market and capitalism, because it didn't have any of the benefits that Virginia and South Carolina had. It didn't have aristocracy, because there was no port to get into North Carolina. It was backwoods. The mountains on one side that prevented people from coming in, and the shore did not allow you to land. There was no port there. And so the worst of the worst ended up in North Carolina. It had to go a long way to get there. Soil wasn't very good either. I read some articles recently about all the farmers who left around the turn of the century, the late 1800s, and came to Mississippi for the soil. So, as a result of embracing that, though, there's been a lot of good things that have happened. There's been a lot of growth in North Carolina. North Carolina is now the 9th most populous state. There are over 10 million people that live there. There are 2 big markets, Charlotte and Raleigh. A lot of good things are happening. But the bad side of that is a lot of people have been paying really high taxes in places like New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. Realized they could get lower taxes and good jobs and cheap land, and they could buy a much bigger house than they could have in New Jersey. So they all came and escaped the Northeast, and they came to North Carolina because it was sort of the end of the North and the beginning of the South, and nice temperate weather and all that. But then they started voting for the same stuff they left. And now North Carolina is on the verge of doing what Virginia did, and it's going to go blue. Basically purple. Thankfully, we voted for Trump, but it was close. So anyway, that's, I agree with you, Laura. Long answer.
To follow that up, one of the things that really bothers me is that there was no pushback in the Carter administration in creating the Department of Education. And I think that was destructive to our educational system, but it was also destructive to our moral values about it in terms of our contract with our children.
Agreed. Yes, sir.
Should one of our objectives be that we would want to have absolutely no federal dollars coming in to support education whatsoever?
No, I'm not necessarily sure that's the case.
It's
I
not
think we could do really well without any federal bureaucracy. I think we could do fine without a Department of Education. I'm not sure we're in the position to do that now as a result of what happened. But I think we can get there.
So is it objective, or is not, should not be, or should be?
Oh, well, you know, in a utopian, libertarian world where, you know, we don't have the, any problems and we can solve them with policy, I think my policy would be that we don't have any federal involvement in education, but knowing that from a practical standpoint, it's probably not possible to just flip the switch. But I think as a long-term objective, I would be in favor of that.
Do you have a newsletter or something that can combat the misinformation we get from mostly our political leaders? You know, they think that they tell everybody that we need to send somebody to Washington to get us more pork
Oh, yeah.
and so on
Right.
like that. Do you have a newsletter that would dispel these?
Yeah, so you go to our website, which is mspolicy.org. You'll find a lot of good information there. I encourage you to sign up for via email. We send out something called the Review every Friday that reviews what we've been doing during the week. We have several people who are being published now, including myself, across the state, in the Ledger, nationally. In fact, if anybody saw today's Daily Signal from the Heritage, there was an article there about welfare reform. It was written by Dr. Taylor, who runs policy for us. We are doing a lot more communicating these ideas much more robustly, so I would appreciate if you'd sign up. You get that. You also get something called the Magnolia Memo, which comes out twice a week, sort of an aggregation of issues that are national or Mississippi that have some connection to Mississippi, some policy implication in Mississippi. And then you certainly can give us your feedback on that website or via email too. We appreciate it.
Are you going to tell us about the luncheon?
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
So there is a luncheon at River Hills Club on July 26th. It's going to feature a lot of what I've been talking about. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Mississippi State Institute for Market Studies. It's at Mississippi State University. They produced a book that just came out called Promoting Prosperity in Mississippi. 3 professors, 1 from the Citadel and 2 from Mississippi State, all PhDs, all economists. This is really good data. They take a scientific approach. We're getting involved in working with them to promote the book as well as the ideas. There's a lot of really good data here. They're going to lay out a story of how they came to write the book and share some of the data and give you more sort of a scientific approach to what I talked about today. But essentially, we're in lockstep. That we've got to embrace capitalism and the free market, and that's the only way that we're going to have prosperity and have everybody participate in that prosperity, not just a select few. So you're welcome. It's lunch is, I think it's $15. You can register for it online. If you sign up for the email, you'll get an invitation to it as well. July 6th lunch at River Hills. Thank you, Laura.
Well, it's important because in the past, Mississippi Center for Public Policy has been probably the only place in Mississippi that's brought thought processes that come from outside of Mississippi. And I'm interested in knowing if you all are looking at some of the ideas that are coming forward from private groups, grassroots who are trying to work with Family Research Council and a few those other people who are trying to work with getting rid of the Safe Harbor Acts of 1987 that have driven our drug prices up. Are you aware of that?
I am. James and I talked about it a little bit, but I haven't gotten into the details. I'm not sure what we've done in the past or what he's doing now, but yeah, that's an issue.
I want to share some stuff that I know about, and it'll take a phone call or a visit.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Enjoyed being with you.